Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. My guest today is Michael Hearns, a veteran law enforcement officer whose experience includes working undercover with Miami's Vice Intelligence and Narcotics Unit. Yes, like Miami Vice, and has also worked as a technical consultant on a variety of movies and TV shows. These days, Michael is the author of the Cade Taylor police thrillers, including Trust No One. We talk about his law enforcement career, how realistic police shows, including Miami Vice, actually are, and his dedication to authenticity in his novels. We also take on the realities of the creative life versus its portrayal on screen, and why it's worth answering your creative call anyway. Here's my conversation with Michael Hearns. Michael, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Sure. So I start everybody off with the same question, which is, were you a creative kid or did you find your creative side later on in your life?
You know, I think there was a creative stream in me as a child. In many ways, I worked and functioned in different organizations that didn't always allow for creativity. So sometimes that creativity came out in the framework of what I was doing. But as far as like the actual flowing of literature or art or music or something, that kind of came later in life.
Okay. So you weren't busy writing stories when you were a little kid?
No, I was telling stories. I wasn't really writing them, no. As a child, my whole existence was playing soccer and running around in the neighborhood with the neighbor kids. So homework got a very passing glance from me, and out the door I went. But I did draw a lot in class and doodle, and I don't know if that was a sign of an absent mind or a sign of creativity that needed to come out. But I didn't write stories as a child. No, not at all.
Okay. So before you started writing stories, you had a totally different career. And I'm hoping that you will tell us how that came to be, and then we'll get into how you started writing.
Yeah. My background is a little varied compared to most people. Actually, coming out of college, my first true love was aviation marketing, and I worked in the aviation industry in marketing. And then when there was downturns and downsizing, and there was also just a whole lot of deregulation in the industry, I found myself needing and wanting a recession-proof job. So I stepped into law enforcement, not something I wanted to do as a child, and then having the aspiration to do that as a young man. And very quickly found myself in South Florida, in Miami, Florida, and working in a street drug crime task force, doing street narcotics. And then very quickly, within 8 or 7 months, migrated into Vice Intelligence Narcotics, VIN, which is like, for your audience, if I could give you an analogy, it was like the old Miami Vice. That I was the real Miami Vice. And I did that for 10 years, and I was undercover in the Medellin and Cali drug cartels, working large-scale cocaine deals and money lots of high-volume money laundering cases as well. And 2 months became 2 years, and 2 years became 20 years, and before you knew it, it was time to retire. And upon retiring, I started working in film and TV as a technical advisor on various products for A&E and NBC. And then kind of parlayed some of that experience into the literature world. I got told a lot I should write a book. I think most people expected me to write some sort of tell-all. I really didn't feel that was where I wanted to be. So I created a fictional character and started writing a fictional series of books about a character named Cade Taylor. He's a detective in Miami, and he's oftentimes vexed and challenged with some pretty serious things. And I wrote my first book called Trust No One. That came out about 3 years ago. And the second book that quickly followed after that was called Grasp and Smoke, a Cade Taylor novel. And then the third book was One More Move, a Cade Taylor novel.
So, first of all, I'm sure that everybody asks you this, but I'm curious to know how you feel about the Miami Vice comparison. How realistic was or wasn't Miami Vice compared to what you actually did?
Well, it's really strange because for us who lived and worked in South Florida, it was a normalcy, um, a skewed normalcy, and a normalcy that had some serious, crazy ramifications to it. So when the national, and then we have dogs, so when the national and international public got a glimpse of Miami Vice, it was a very stylized version of what we were doing. But there is a case where life and art imitate each other, and then they start to intertwine with each other, and then eventually meld together. So in the beginning, it was not as stylized, but by the end of my career, we were also driving very expensive cars, and I spent a lot of time in New York, a lot of time in Los Angeles working, and um, it really became a situation of life and art coming together.
Hmm.
So the version you see, I would say, is very stylized and is also very amped up. But there's also a lot of truth in that component as well.
Okay. Well, and truth is something that I wanted to ask you about because since you have worked as a consultant for film and TV, I know my one of my cousins is married to a now retired Massachusetts state trooper, and she's told me that it's impossible to watch a police show with him because he will shout back at the TV about all the things that they're doing wrong. And I'm just curious what kind of things you're asked about as a technical consultant and how much say you have in how those things are portrayed for the rest of us.
That really has a lot to do with the confidence and the leeway that the producers, the showrunners, and the director allow you to have. In my case, I literally was cast right into the fire. I was working on a movie in Cornwall, New York, kind of west of the Hudson, and I got a phone call. Can you be in Pittsburgh tomorrow to work on this NBC TV show? And right away, the next morning, I showed up on set, and within 6 or 7 minutes of being there, I was asked to coordinate and choreograph an entire shooting scene of guns. When I say shooting, I mean actual guns and such. And the actors, they're prepped to a point, but there's nuances to everything in life. And the longer you do something, the more you understand these nuances, shortcuts, these aspects. And I was working with some really good directors. The directors I was working with had done a lot of television, a lot of Hawaii Five O, a lot of 24, a lot of Homeland. So they're used to this type of high speed action. So I was able to impart a lot of stuff that they really hadn't seen before, and I was happy about that. I was actually surprised, to be honest with you. I thought everyone knew these things, and they really didn't. Um, there is a sophisticated audience out there now. There's no longer just this pure acceptance of, oh, it's Dragnet, and these two guys are going to get in the car and they're going to drive down Los Angeles, and then they're going to go interview this woman and they're going to find out what her purse is. The audience is more sophisticated now, and that kind of goes with the books I've been writing. And Trust No One, Grasp and Smoke, One More Move. I try to bring an element in the books that you don't normally see in books and in movies. Um, the books I write are incredibly authentic, but they're not boringly authentic. I mean, every job has got its boring side to it. I try to bring in elements that the reader does not see, and because I worked in film and TV, I write from a cinematic point of view. I'm not the type of writer who's going to say, "Oh, me and Nancy, we got in the car and we drove to Kansas City, and then we got there and we checked into the hotel, and Nancy talked to the bellman." I'm like, "Well, wait a minute, hold on. What did you do when you drove? What did you stop? What did you eat? What did you see?" So I bring a lot of description into my books, and there's also a lot of research. Everything is very authentic. And one of the things that, like in relation to your brother-in-law, the former Massachusetts state police officer, when we Miamians used to watch Miami Vice, we would go, because they would make a left-hand turn and then The next time they turned, they'd be like literally like 18 miles apart. And we knew that. So in my books, uh, from a geographical point of view, from a chronological point of view, everything's very accurate. When they order something from a menu, it actually comes from the menu of the restaurant. When they the cars they drive, the phones they use, the things they do are all very authentic. Nothing is just made up. There is no. I turned down Maple Street. I went to Elm Avenue, and we went down Birch Road. They're actual streets, actual places. And my next door neighbor reads my books and holds Google Maps open while she reads it. And she plots. Okay, they went here, they went there, they went there. So yeah, the audience is sophisticated. Don't underestimate that. They know hardware, they know weaponry, they know some semblance of tactics. So you have to kind of bring an element for them they haven't seen or heard before.
That's interesting, the comparison. I hadn't thought to go back as far as something like Dragnet and think about how police work portrayal has changed over time. But certainly if you go back that far, you don't even have to think about it really at all. Whereas if you're comparing something like Miami Vice or Hill Street Blues to, something that's out now, it doesn't seem like it's as different, but I'll bet that it's more different than I would guess at first blush.
Yeah, from a television point of view, but like every time the radio came on, they would show a close up of the radio. Like we, the audience, couldn't put that. And what's interesting about Hill Street Blues is people don't realize this, that Hill Street Blues, the first year, were based on all Miami stories. The very first, every episode was based on true Miami cases. And Hugh Peoples, former Miami-Dade police officer, was a technical advisor, which is what I was doing with the other shows. And that's when they're very open and they say, you hear the dispatcher talk, take a call on People's Drive. That's a little homage to him, that he had helped them with that. So Miami Vice had very good technical advisors too. Some of them I actually worked with in the field. So those two shows were given good technical advisors. They had good technical advisors, even though they're stylized and some of the plots were a little outrageous. They were still. You have to remember, it's even though it's 60 minutes to television, it truthfully is 48 minutes with commercials. And 48 minutes, we got to figure out there's a bad situation, figure out there's a bad guy, and we got to catch the bad guy. Life isn't like that in real life. And that's why my books, which are my right hand, left hand, that's why my books, which are behind me, are all like 330, 340 pages, because things don't get wrapped up in 48 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Before we delve more into the books, I am wondering, since you said that you've kind of been on both sides of this technical advisor thing. How is the one side different than the other, or how did working with the people from Miami Vice influence how you took on that role in other contexts?
Well, as a technical advisor for a film or TV show, you want to bring as much authenticity and realism as you can, but you have to also keep in the back of your mind it's entertainment. And directors will come up to you and they'll say, I want the lead character to do this. And you'll look in your head, you'll go, that would never happen. And then the director will say, I know that doesn't happen, but I need a Jeopardy moment. And so you have to kind of suspend your own logic and recognize that this is television, it is entertainment. So there's going to have to be a melding. There's going to have to be an amalgamation of what you're bringing from an authentic side and what they need from an entertainment side. So luckily for me, a good cast, good people, well-known actors, directors were amazing. So I was able to bring a lot to them and for them, and in return, they put out a good product.
Fair enough. So did doing technical advising work inspire the books that you ended up writing, or is that a totally different piece of process and work for you?
No, I would kind of call it an ignition point. I was living in Miami, but I was working sometimes out of Manhattan, and then I was also part-time living in Malibu. So, all along the airplane trips back and forth and all along sitting on the sets, and people think being a technical advisor is super glamorous, and I can understand that. But truthfully, I spend most of my time standing around with a bunch of Teamsters watching them vape. I just no, it's like when I'm needed, I'm needed. But I'm not always needed for a bedroom scene or for some other scene. So there's time to think. There's time to reflect and time to collaborate in your own head. And since the first book, Trust No One, had been kicking around inside my head for about a decade. So in between working on the TV shows, there's some downtime, and I thought, well, and I remember I was sitting out in Malibu, and that's when I first started Trust No One. And then they went in the suitcase with me, and as I made my travels and my trips around places, it just got bigger and bigger until it became a book. And I had an idea for a second book, but the main character in my books is a detective named Cade Taylor, and there's been such a demand for Cade. There really is a legion of Cade Taylor people out there that really galvanized the character. In a classic case, it gave people what they want. Continued to write the series, and now we have, and technically speaking, a franchise.
Yeah. So did Cade kind of come to you? And I don't know, maybe he wasn't the first thing that came to you, but I'm just curious to kind of see how this first story kind of materialized for you. Was he somebody that was, largely based on people or on yourself, or did he just kind of arrive more or less fully formed in your head and say, "Hi, let's write a book"?
That's a very good question, and I would have to say it's a collage of all of that. I was doing some documentary work with Rankator, which is actually they have a piece premiering today on Hulu. They did Cocaine Cowboys and all, so I did some work with them. And there's a fascination with that lifestyle, and there's a fascination with Miami. Miami's a city that you may not have lived in it, but you may have at least visited. And like Chicago, New York, or Los Angeles, it can do well for a backdrop. Um, people are still very intrigued with the narcotic world. They're intrigued with the men and women who are on either side of that line. And I had the opportunity to have a very spy optic view of that world. I not only lived in it, I also helped to create it, and I learned to thrive in it. And then I also learned how to exit from it, which is even more important. Um, and what's interesting is people who do know me will read the books, and they'll call me on the phone and they'll say, "Hey, I'm on page 210." I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. I don't know what 210 means. Let me see, 210. Yeah, I got to read. And I'll say, well, it helps if you. Well, what's going on? And they'll go, "Oh, well, you just did this and you just did that." And I go, well, "It's not me. It's Cade Taylor." And they go, "Yeah, I know, but it's you." And I go, "No, it's Cade Taylor." So I was able to bring in experiences from my life into these characters, and there's a elongation and a like taffy. You're pulling it, and you're pulling. In the center is realism, and then you're pulling in all these other things. And just like in the TV shows, you have to bring elements in to make it exciting for the reader. So I won't call it embellishment, but it's part of the telling of the story. And in my books, once again, everything that's referenced and mentioned, it could be something political, it could be something sports related. Those things really happened on those days. So not only can you hold my book up and read it, but you can actually know what day it is and what year it is by the actual events that are going on. So it's almost as if while you were living your life, Cade Taylor was amongst you doing things, but just unbeknownst to you. So I'm giving you kind of, once again, using the word bioptic, I'm giving you a bioptic view of this world that was that you probably were cycling around, you just didn't realize.
Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated by how that intersects with the fact that this is still fiction. Like, I had a conversation last year with an author named Sarah Fine who writes psychological thrillers and is a psychologist. And she mentioned to me that her rule is that, it has to be psychologically accurate. And so that is a huge influence on how she looks at the whole project. And obviously that is a huge lens for you too. But how do you bridge that with the things that kind of like what you were referring to with the TV director and saying I need my Jeopardy moment. You know, how do you bridge that?
Well, to dovetail what Sarah was telling you is you're trying to bring your readers into this world that they may not ever be exposed to. But in the same respect, you don't want to lecture them and you don't want to make this an educational textbook. So through the art of storytelling and through the art of writing, you're not only bringing them along this journey, but you're also bringing them along this path of knowledge. And so people are coming up to me now and they're saying, I had no idea that that's what that life was like. And they're seeing that Cade Taylor, Cade is not a perfect individual. He starts out and trusts no one at the very front part of a very vicious divorce, and he's emotionally shattered by it, and he's trying to hold it all together, and he's trying to keep it together. His emotions and his penchant for drinking. He's trying to keep all that under wraps while he is in this very intense vice narcotics situation. And then as the books progress, Cade is continuously still dealing with the divorce, although he's not stuck in one location. He's moving along that situation. And if you've ever, I'm sure at both our stanzas in life, we may have experienced loss, and it could be a divorce or a death or whatever it may be. We recognize that that's not a one and done. There's a healing process, and there's a grieving process, and there's a whole gamut of emotions. And then throughout these three books, soon to be the fourth one, we were watching Cade as he maneuvers through his life and how he manages these things. Yet he still has to stay in the game. He can't just say, "Hey, I don't feel good today. I got to check out." And not only does he stay in the game, but the game is actually coming to him, and he has to really be as sharp as he can be, even though he would love to just sit in a swimming pool and have a drink.
Well, and I would think in particular, you mentioned being undercover for so long that has to be, I mean, that's a situation you can't just say, sorry, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going home now, going back to my own life. That's got to be incredibly, incredibly stressful. And I'm curious to know how your experience with that influences how you portray that with Cade.
Well, yeah, there's a coalesce between Cade and I in that respect. And as Michael Hearns, I fielded phone calls from some very nefarious people at my father's hospital bedside, my son's hospital bedside. I became a professional time thief. I stole from work to do family things. I stole from family time to do work things. It was 24/7. Many times the phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I rolled out of bed and I had to get going. There were times when I would have breakfast at a waterside restaurant in Miami and have dinner that night in Los Angeles with no intention of being in Los Angeles. I would, uh, you know, I was supposed to pick the kids up at school, and now I'm calling from, in my time, the air phone. You remember the CT phone?
Mm-hmm.
I'm calling from the air phone saying I'm on my way to LaGuardia. I always had to have winter clothes in my car in winter in case I had to leave Miami. So yeah, there's a lot of it was very stressful, but I tell people all the time it was very much like being in a hurricane. I mean, you're in the center of a hurricane, it's very calm. It's all the stuff that's swirling around you. It's when you step out of the hurricane or you travel through the eye wall of the hurricane, you realize the destruction and the debris. And it was coming out of that lifestyle that you look back and you see, um, for lack of a better term, I'm not going to say destruction and debris with the family unit, but you see how they were impacted by that job and how other people were impacted by that job. Because for me, it was normal. For me, it
Yeah.
was what I do every day, day in and day out. We had people in my police department who had never even seen me. I was just a name on a piece of paper, if that at all. And when I came out of VIN, uh, Vice Intelligence Narcotics, when I came out of VIN and went back to regular police work, I was meeting people for the first time, and they were 7, 8 year veterans, and they were like, "I'd heard about you, but I've never seen you." It's like, "Yeah, here I
Well,
am."
yeah, I'd imagine that that has to be some serious culture shock too. You get used to this completely different way of existing.
Yeah, if you're not grounded, I mean, I was lucky in the sense that my high school and childhood friends are still my friends now. So I didn't lose my touchstones. I didn't lose the things that kept me grounded to reality. Um, so yes, there were some transitional action problems and hiccups, but for the most part, it was a smooth transaction. I came in the job wearing a uniform. I didn't care if I left wearing one. That's how it starts. That's how it ends. And all roads lead to the road. So
Well, and you also have a degree in criminal psychology. So, you know, I'm not exactly sure how to ask this question, but I'm wondering both how that helped in your actual undercover and not undercover work, and in how that influences how you draw your more nefarious characters in your books.
yeah, in all three books, I really haven't gotten into any type of serial action, any type of repeat violent offender behavior. They're all standalone books. They're best if you read them in sequence because they are sequential. Cade is moving through his life, but if you read them out of order, you won't have any spoilers or anything like that. In my case, I had a degree in business economics, and when I left VIN, towards the back end of VIN, I got tasked with a serial homicide case in Miami, and I had a successful resolve with that case. And I started to work very closely with a forensic psychologist. And police officers are very tribal. They wear a certain uniform, they drive a certain type of car, they talk in a certain language. So they're also very territorial. So when my agency started loaning me out to other departments to assist them with their own serial situations, it could be a serial rape, a serial burglar, serial arsonist, or a serial murderer. I got a lot of pushback because there was a lot of indignation about why is this guy here? We can do this. We don't need him.
Mm.
So I went and pursued and got my degree, my master's in investigative criminal psychology, and I accepted for a PhD in the UK for it. I was one of only 7 people accepted into the program, the only American accepted. And it was it was like 4 years before I retired. But the problem was that going back and forth to England with the VAT tax and the British pound versus the dollar and leaving the agency going back and forth, it was just very, very big imposition. So I got all the academic background of it. I just never finished a PhD, but I do have the master's in it. So then I started working serial homicide cases, and I'm more known for the narcotic work, but I don't. Not so much known for the serial homicide work, but I do. I was teaching a course at Champlain College in Vermont, and there are some other scripted and non-scripted TV projects that are asking my assistance on. And then there's also real cases that get asked to me, even in retirement. And you have to be very careful about that because if you have any sense of empathy, if you have any sense of humanity, that stuff will really eat you up. So when my wife or someone says to me, "Hey, did you read that there's X amount of people being murdered in X amount of city?" I just no. Unless I'm being directly asked to take part in it, I don't do it because my emotional absorption for all that is limited. Um, I call it putting on my dark clothes
Hmm.
when I am presented with a case that I need to look into for a police agency or sometimes it's the grieving family, and that's really hard. Um, I like take on like flu symptoms for like the first 24 hours until
Wow.
I get my equilibrium. Even after all, I've worked on some pretty well known cases, but as a consultant, and it doesn't get easier. Um, I don't think it gets harder, but it doesn't get easier. And it's like driving. I'm not really familiar with what part of the country you're in, but it's like driving through the Lincoln Tunnel or driving over the Golden Gate Bridge. It's something you have to do to get from point A to point B.
Hmm.
But in that transitional um, moment, yeah, I take on a lot of stuff, and also in the vein of this podcast, there has to be a sense of creativity also in that investigation. You have to be able to look at these situations differently than the average person. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I let the, I get in the serial kill, I get in the serial killer's head." And the reality is, you let him get into your head. And it's a whole different.
That sounds so much more disturbing than getting into their head too. Is that an accurate reaction, would you say?
No, that's an accurate reaction. And what it is basically it's easier to throw someone out of your house than it is to get yourself thrown out of the house. That makes any sense.
Yeah.
If I let you in, then I can close the door. But if you let me in, you have to show me how to get out.
Oof.
Yeah, it gets weird. It gets twisty.
Yeah.
Someone has to do it.
Yeah, well, and it reminds me of your comment earlier about how, learning how to thrive in some of the situations that you were in, because I think that, the world of TV and books and everything doesn't necessarily make it look easy, but probably makes it look easier than it actually is.
Yeah, the visual arts, they have a it's almost like music. There's a beat to it. And you don't recognize this when you're watching your movies and your TV shows, but your directors and the pacing of a show is almost like a musical beat. And it's going to be, we're going to introduce this is going to happen, and then that's going to happen. And people are happy with a resolve. They're happy with a solution. Sometimes things don't always have an easy solution. And you have to learn to live with the fact that sometimes you are not going to solve the Rubik's Cube. There's been plenty of time you've been at a party and you've done this, you know, you know, and that's what happens sometimes. Sometimes there is no easy solution.
Yeah. So tell me how Cade Taylor went from the idea in your head to the books on your shelf.
It was kind of like a multi-step process. One of the biggest things was I went through a divorce myself, and I started to date um, my wife now, and my wife at the time was a CEO of a very large nonprofit, and she was fielding 210, 190 emails a day, and jammed up schedule. And she was like, so in the morning, she was like, so this is what I got going on. What do you have going on? I was like, I'm gonna go ride my bike. You know, I need to extenuate this purpose of life. I need to. I've always been a person of action. I've always been a person of movement. So I need to, you know, do something. So I'm going to write a book. And she goes, really? Okay. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you later on tonight. Okay. And then it was like, what are you doing? I'm writing. Oh, okay. I'm writing. Okay. Okay. And then, um, like I said, trust no one. Although not titled, the storyline had been bounced in my head for about 10 years, and the book came out, and people really liked it a lot, and they really took to it. So once again, like I said, give the people what they want. Second, Cade Taylor, Grasp and Smoke came out, and the reason we use Grasp and Smoke is it's actually a term from criminal profiling. It's when you can see something but you can't get your hands around it. So it's like grasp and smoke. Yeah,
Hmm.
you can see it, but you can't hold it. And then in that book, Cade is vexed with a situation where he can kind of see what's going on, but he can't get his hands around it. And then the third one was one more move. So the book started to tumble out, for lack of a better term, and they became building blocks for each other. And Grasp and Smoke was built off of the foundation created by Trust No One. And then we decided to make another edition, and one more move was built off of the two of them, and that's how kind of how we're moving here. And much like um, Jack Reacher, Harry Bosch, there's a certain cadence and rhythm to those books, and I'm hoping to replicate that same cadence and rhythm for my readers. And this is not an and or. This is a obviously I hope everybody enjoys all authors and all books. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to do here.
When you mentioned to me that they've done better than expected.
Well, I say done better than expected because I am not the type of author who has 600 copies of my books in my garage. You see me at a farmer's market, trying to hustle them and everything else. I went through the traditional literary agent publishers, and it was it's a very uphill battle. And there's certain things that go on in the publishing world, both in music and in books, that a novice doesn't understand until they get into it.
Mm-hmm.
So my books are published by a multimedia company, and they're available everywhere. Every independent bookstore, your bigger chains, Walmart, Target, obviously Amazon, the world's biggest bookseller. But you're not going to see it on the shelf. You're going to have to go into your independent bookstore and say, I want Trust No One by Michael Hearns. And look it up on their computer, and 2 days later, they'll have it for you. My books are published by the world's largest book publisher. It's just that I don't have that large marketing machine behind me.
Mm-hmm.
There are no 15-foot posters of me in front of Barnes and everything else.
I've always thought those were a little strange. I mean, they seem normal when they're not you, but if they were you,
Well, the thing is that those moments are very fleeting, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain mathematical equation to become a New York Times bestseller and other things. And there's certain, I won't say tricks, I'll just say there's certain techniques to doing that. But if you look at the New York Times bestseller list, with the exception of a few books, people are on there one week and they're gone the next. It's great to say you're a New York Times bestseller. I could probably say that. I don't think that eventually someone might call me on it, but no, I can't. True. But the books are gaining traction. They're selling in Australia. They're selling in England. They're selling um, through across the U.S. And people are starting to talk about them. So they're more of a word of mouth type thing. They're all pulling very solid ratings on Amazon and other book rating companies or book rating platforms. And the podcast is rooted in creativity, and part of the problem with creativity is when you have to be your own marketer, you have to be your own social media director,
Mm-hmm.
create content, and you have to vacuum the rug, you have to take the dog to the vet, you got to go to the supermarket. All those things get in the way of creativity. And, creativity, we see in our arts and movies a man or woman living in a cabin somewhere and painting or sculpting or writing, and they seem to have unlimited funds and unlimited time. And the reality of life is that it doesn't always work that way. You got to get it in when you can. And I get it in sparks, and I say to my wife all the time, I have to write today. And she says, well, you say it to me like you're telling me, yeah, like I go, yeah, because if I announce it to you, then I know I'll have to do it. But if I don't announce it, then I can slack off. And then once the books start going, they start to take on a life of their own. Cade does wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's like he's like problems, problems, problems. Cade wakes me up, and Cade, he's on my mind quite a lot when I'm writing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I always love those moments when characters talk to me.
Oh, and they do.
Yeah. Oh, they do. They so
And they
do.
do. And they do. I mean, unless you've done it, it's hard to explain. It's like, did you ever run with the bulls in Pamplona? No, but if you've done it, you remember it. Doing the same. And the people you write. I mean, they get in there, and people don't recognize sometimes that when you're writing these books, um, you're writing dialogue for four people at one time, and you're setting scene and you're setting stage, and they in my books you'll hear about the air conditioner turning on, you hear about the door swinging open and rubbing against the carpet, you hear all these things are brought into my writing because I write very descriptively, because once again I write from a cinematic point of view. So I visualize things the way I write. So yeah, it's daunting to coordinate and choreograph all those voices and all those things, and some of them have different dialects and accents and things. So yeah.
Yeah. But I'm really glad that you brought up the fact that, again, TV presents this image of, the writer who has all day to just sit at their laptop and write their book and doesn't have to go to the grocery store and doesn't have to deal with calling the plumber and, any of
Oh yeah.
that and all of the things that get in the way. And I think that it's really, really easy for a lot of people to say, well, I said I wanted to write a book, but when I sat down, I had to answer the door, and then the dog started barking, and then my kids came home from school, and oh, well, I guess I'm just not a creative person because it can't happen because I can't sit down this way and have 8 hours to spend just writing a book, which I'm not sure that anybody really spends 8 solid. Well, okay, I'm sure somebody does, but you know, I think that we tell ourselves that it has to look one way, but reality often isn't that way. And I'm not sure how often we leave room for that reality and find ways around it. Like, telling somebody, I'm going to write today so that you have to do it. That is such a simple thing, but it works. I've definitely done that before, called somebody and said, I don't need you to care about this. I just need you to hear me say it. And then I'll tell you that I actually did it later. That's all I need. And it sounds nuts, but it works.
Yeah, we have to get away from measuring our life against others, and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that we are our own people and we are our own spirit. We are our own. Well, I'm not going to say any names, but there's a very, very famous artist, and he was my next door neighbor. And I would see him, and we'd be talking, and I'd go, "Hey, why don't you put some orange in there?" You go, "Okay, I'll do that for you." And you don't have any idea that this painting is going to sell for $55,000. That orange part, and so it wasn't that I was stepping into this creativity. It's just that you recognize that you have a place in everybody's sphere, and you have a place in your own sphere. And you may not hit the tennis ball like Serena Williams, and you may not hit the golf ball like Tiger Woods, but you're still going to do it. And the ball's going to go over the net, and the ball's going to go in the hole. And you may not have the panache, you may not have the style, it may not have the marketing machine, it may not have the corporate sponsorship, but it's you and it's yours. And I used to, I used to work in a part of Miami that was very affluent. And sometimes these young officers would come into a house with me, and they would see this 22, $30 million home. And they would, oh man, look at this. Oh man, look at that. And I would remind them, when you close your eyes at night, your house is just as dark.
Ooh,
And,
yeah.
so just because so and so has their artwork, in a major airport somewhere, and yours is hanging on a refrigerator, it does not make yours any less desirable. We all have a seat at the table, and you have to just be gracious, appreciative, happy, thankful, and while you're there, be a little productive and make it happen for you. But don't think that because so and so selling books like out the door, and I'm getting 2 sales a week, the two people who read them like it,
Yeah.
and that's where we are. And
It's two more than other people who never wrote a book in the first place.
yeah, and the other thing also is when you make a movie or a film, truthfully speaking, you make three movies. You make the movie that you wrote that got greenlighted, then you make the movie you filmed, and then you make the movie you edit, and that's the final product. But you really never in the same frame all the time. But when you're making a movie, I mean, go to any movie theater, watch a movie and sit through the credits and look at all the names. When you write a book, it is your name that's on the back of the spine and no one else's.
Mm-hmm.
And that says a lot. And the same thing being a painter. It's your name at the bottom of the artwork and no one else's. So those are solo projects.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing that gets lost in it, I think we want to focus on, I wrote the book, or I did the painting, or I made the movie, and that the book or the movie or the painting or whatever it is the important part. But I think really the important part is you had a call to create something and you listened to it, and hopefully you did it because you enjoyed doing it. And that, the fact that you finished the book is the byproduct and not the sole focus of the fact that you listened to that creative call and you felt the joy of creating the thing. And anything that comes after that is a bonus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like you say, the picture that's hanging on the refrigerator. Well, if you or whoever drew that picture that gave it to you drew it for the joy of it, of course it has just as much value as the one that hangs in the museum, whether anybody else ever sees it or not.
Yeah. When I was in my 20s, I saw an interview with Dave Thomas, the founder of the Wendy's hamburger chain.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody called in and said, "Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Thomas. How do you feel holding all these people to minimum wage while you make so much money?" And the moderator tried to cut the caller off. And Dave Thomas said, "No, let me think that." He goes, "I'll think that." He goes, I'm comfortable with that. We employ a lot of people." And he went into some business stats. But then he also said, "I'm comfortable with it because I took the risk. I mortgaged my house. I leveraged all my credit cards to get the first Wendy started. I took the risk." And so when you write that book and you put your name on the spine of it, you're taking the risk. You're putting your work out there to be reviewed, to be read, to be criticized, to be cherished, to be thrown away, to be a keepsake, whatever it may be. You're taking the risk. And there's a lot to be said for that. And when you obviously, by my gender, you can tell I've never given birth. I've had many people say to me that upon giving birth, all the pain goes away. The thought, all the pain and all the of labor of childbirth is forgotten. And when the book is written and it's done, you forget about all the late nights, all the fretting, all the worrying, all the stuff that went done. And in my case, many times after the book is done, I've read it so many times myself. I've gone over it so many times that I'm ready to move on to the next one. It may not even be out available to the public yet, and I've already mentally moved on to the next one because I have read my wife. I go, "Why do you keep reading your book?" And I'm looking for errors and everything. And there's always people who live in fine print who are going, on page 116 there's a typo. Yeah, I know, and there's a typo. I get it. Go through any book, you're going to find a typo.
Yep. Yes, you are.
It also gives people, they say those things to you because they want to have a connection to you as well. It's not that they're being highly critical. It's their way of saying to you, "I read your book and I want to have something to talk to you about." So
yeah.
Okay. Tell me about the typo 116.
Yeah, and then tell me what you thought of the plot. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's right. That you do reach a point where you have to be done with one project, or you'll just obsess over it and drive yourself crazy. And it just gets to where it's time to move on to the next one. And even if it was, unless you had a truly, truly horrific experience doing whatever that project was, the joy of doing it and the energy of doing it is going to make it something that you jump into again anyway, just like people say about giving birth, like you forgot, or maybe it's not even so much that you forgot, it's that it's not as important, how painful that was. And now it's time to go do it again because the excitement and the joy of it outweighs
Yeah,
all the
the triumph
rest.
and the release is
Hmm.
stronger than the toil. Um, I thought that Trust No One, my first book, was going to be, I'm going to say a one and done. I already had an idea of another character I was going to do in Los Angeles. And I started getting emails and I started getting phone calls. I started getting, in social media and stuff, I started getting comments about when's the next one? When's the next one? I can't wait for the next one. So I thought, okay. So
That's a
now, you
that's a
know,
good motivator too.
yeah, and if you still have gas in the tank, why not? It's
Yeah.
like you pick up a hitchhiker. I don't suggest you do that, by the way. Like a hitchhiker, you let that person out, and now there's another hitchhiker. You still got gas in the tank. Why turn the car off? Just pick up the second one and go down the road until that journey is over. And if you still got gas in the tank, you pick up the third one. It's a terrible analogy, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
Hmm.
You know, um, there's no need to change direction if people have an attraction or an affiliation to something. Um, and they like Cade. They like Cade Taylor a lot, and they like the fact that he's flawed. He's not perfect, and he also tells you all of these stories in the first person. All of my books are written in the first person, so it's not like I'm saying, um, you know, um, the guy jumped over the fence. Cade says, "I jumped over the fence.
Hmm.
I hurt my pants, but I jumped over the fence."
So, given your work in the TV and film industry, what do you think is next for Cade? Do you think that there's a possibility that there might be a movie or a TV series or anything like that? Would you
Uh,
want to go there?
I would, and I would welcome all opportunities at any level, and any artist in their field should open up themselves to any opportunity that comes their way. Anyone that says to you, "Well, I'm just a painter and I don't want myself on a Disney mug," well, you got to think about that. I mean, I have a friend of mine. He lived next door to me in college, and he is an incredible artist, and he's worked for Marvel for 30 years, and he's I don't want to say that he's done Spider Man, he's done the Hulk, he's done Captain America. He's a demigod in that field. And I saw him about a year ago or so. We're drinking, having a drink or something, and I said, "So how do you feel about that?" He goes, "Well, I always wanted my stuff, hanging in a museum." And I'm like, "Buddy, when you write an edition, it sells 500,000 copies on the first day. It is tacked up in every kid's bedroom from Tokyo to Tacoma to Tel Aviv. People are seeing your work. It may not be where you thought you were going to be 30 years ago, but you're bringing joy. You're bringing the writer's story to life with your illustrations. So I think that we should all kind of recognize that if you have the ability to bring something to somebody, and I've had people tell me that, "Oh, I read your book and um, it brought this emotion out of me or brought this feeling out of me." Well, then that's good. Whether even if it's an unintended consequence, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll bet you that your Marvel friend has has been seen by way more people than would have seen him in a museum anyway.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And he's comfortable with it now. He really is. In fact, I don't want to reveal who he is or what he is, but he has major projects in front of him. So, in answer to your question, yeah, there is an A-list actor in Hollywood who has expressed an interest in portraying Cade. Um, Hollywood puts out a lot of products, and we see only like 2 or 3% of them. There's a lot of stuff that gets shown on a cruise ship in the Indian Ocean you never see. And what possibilities there are for Cade Taylor to be brought into a different multimedia are they're limitless. And there are people who read the books and say, "I would love to see this in a TV show. I'd love to see this in a movie." So because I write in a cinematic point of view, and I'm going to give this thing to you again. Because I write in a cinematic point of view, they're very easily adaptable for that. The language, the dialogue, the scenes of the book are very easy to be converted into film. And I think that has writers, the example I gave you before, me and Nancy, we drove to Kansas City. And it's not just Gen Xers. It's we as a society are becoming more visual.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read a book, you also want to have a visual imagery. And the days of Ernest Hemingway saying, I sail on a boat, the ocean is big, my boat is small, my boat sails on the ocean. We get it, Ernest. We get it. But today's readers, not to besmirch a classic, but today's readers want to know, is the boat made of wood? Is it made out of fiberglass? Is it a leak? How many times have you painted it? How did you get that boat? Where'd you buy the boat? Why do you like that boat so much? Why are you on the sea? Why are you on? We want a more visual presentation. So when you bring the reader into this world, and Cade does that because Cade talks to you in the first person. So people say all the time, I feel like I was right there with Cade when this was happening, because it's not a narrator telling you, it's Cade.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, I will be really, really curious to see where Cade goes from here and see if he ends up on a screen. And I hope that, if he does, that it's a very faithful adaptation.
Yeah. There'll have to be some tweaking here and there, but the books take place in Trust No One is February of 1998. Grasp and Smoke is October, and One More Move is November. So one of the concerns is, it's very expensive to do a period piece. And even though it seems like 1998 was not that far away, it truthfully was 9/11. So, but these books don't have to be a period piece. They can be modern things. It really all started because I had needed to justify why Cade had a pager, And so I set it there, and now I'm kind of stuck in that chronological time frame. But these are highly adaptable to 2023, 2020.
Yeah.
You can adapt them in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Well, I hope that it happens, and we'll see where you go from there.
Well, I hope so too, and I appreciate those kind sentiments. Like I said, people seem to really like Cade, and he doesn't always save the day perfectly. He doesn't always save the day by himself. He doesn't always. There's a lot of things that go right, a lot of things go wrong in these books, and he is human. He has frailties. He has emotions. He has, but he stays in the fight. He stays in the fight, and he fights. He plays the game very well. He's very street smart, and he's in all these books. I bring an element of law enforcement and an element of that lifestyle that you've never seen before in books or TVs before or movies. So yeah, all three books so far, Cade has exactly the action sequences or something that's never been done before.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be a good challenge for whoever decides to adapt him.
Yeah, it's doable. It's
yeah.
Doable. We're not hanging from a blimp over Paris. It's
yeah, that's James Bond.
yeah.
Well, I'll be curious to see what happens, and I really, really appreciate you coming and talking with me today. That's our show for this week. My thanks to Michael Hearns for joining me and to you for listening. Please leave a review of the show, and in it, tell us about the creative thing that you do just for the love of it. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. I appreciate it so much. It really helps the show find new listeners. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to get in touch on any of my social platforms or even via email at nancy@fycuriosity.com and tell me what you loved. And if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, and you haven't yet signed up for my free email series on 6 of the most common creative beliefs that are messing you up, please check it out. It'll untangle those myths and help you get rolling again. You can find it at fycuriosity.com, and there's also a link right in your podcast app. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. Thanks.